Paid DLC zombies maps versus free DLC zombies maps. Which do you prefer? This has been a pretty huge question amongst the Call of Duty Zombies community for the past few years, ever since free DLC was first introduced with Black Ops Cold War. Recently, I saw a poll from CJ Santa who asked if you prefer paid DLC or if you prefer free DLC, and over 70% of voters said they prefer paid DLC. Only roughly 30% said they prefer free DLC. Now, to a lot of people, this is very puzzling. They are wondering why in the hell would anybody prefer having to pay for DLC maps over getting it for free? And I do believe one of the main arguments is that a lot of people think that paid DLC maps for zombies usually results in a higher quality experience with more depth compared to when the DLC maps are free, like what we've had since Black Ops Cold War. Now, I wanted to do this video to break down each of the sides of this argument and give my own thoughts and opinions on what I think is better for Call of Duty Zombies. It's a very nuanced topic. I do think there are pros and cons to both. A lot of people online will act like it's not nuanced whatsoever and they'll just be all in on one side, but personally, I think there definitely could be some pros and cons that are worthy of discussing. So let's start off with one of the biggest positives of free DLC Zombies maps, and this is the fact that it overall just makes zombies more popular. This is because more people will have more content in zombies to play throughout the entire year, which likely will result in a higher player retention. Now, I'm not saying that every single zombies with free DLC will always have a higher player retention than games without free DLC, but I do think free DLC plays a huge role in whether or not more people are going to come back to play the mode throughout the entire year. There are many players that refuse to buy DLC in most video games that they play. It really only is the hardcore fans that are going to be actively buying every single DLC map that releases. Most fans will kind of pick and choose specific ones that look the most interesting, or they just won't buy any DLC whatsoever, especially those players that just buy every COD at launch to just play it for a couple months and then they drop it and never touch it again. And with the newer games, they might have more of a reason to return just because they're going to have a bunch of new free content to play later on in the year. Whereas with the older games, they didn't have that. They would return to the game 6 months later and it would have the exact same content that it had at launch when they first loaded up the game. And no matter how good those DLC maps are, like I said, people will refuse to pay for DLC content, so they just will never get to experience those really incredible maps. And there are some games like Black Ops 2, for example, where the launch content is pretty bad and then the DLC maps are incredible. So there's many people out there who only ever played Transit and they never got to experience Mob of the Dead, Buried, or Origins. And you might say, well, oh, this doesn't really affect me because I'm personally willing to buy all the DLC for a game, so I don't really care if they're going to charge me a bunch for it. But what if you have friends that you enjoy playing Call of Duty Zombies with and they refuse to buy certain DLC maps? I personally had that experience a bunch back in the day. There were so many maps I just wanted to play with so many different friends, and a lot of the time they just wouldn't have those maps downloaded because they never purchased them. I specifically have a friend who stopped playing Call of Duty after Infinite Warfare, and they only returned with Black Ops 6 because the game was on Game Pass and because all the DLC is free, so they didn't have to spend a single dime on the game to play it. Obviously, that only works for someone who already had Game Pass to begin with. Obviously, if you have to buy Game Pass just to play Call of Duty, then you're not necessarily spending no money for it. But regardless, the fact that they had all these DLC maps to play was definitely something that convinced them to return because they know they didn't have to spend any money on it. And even though this video is meant to be mostly focused on zombies, I do want to mention multiplayer real quick because I think the positive impact free DLC has on multiplayer is even greater than that of zombies, specifically because DLC maps in the past aren't even playable anymore after a certain point because they never show up in the public match rotation. I frequently revisit the older Call of Duty multiplayers. I love doing that. It's a very fun thing to do, but the DLC maps literally never show up in rotation. Every now and then, maybe in the more popular COD games like BO2 or BO3, they might show up every now and then because a lot of people bought those DLC maps, but for many of the other games, they almost never show up because not enough players have the DLC maps. This really sucks because I would love to play those maps again in public lobbies, but they just don't show up anymore because there's not enough people who have those DLC maps. If they were all free, then you would have way more maps in the game to play and way more maps that would show up in the rotation. But like I said before, I do think this is a very nuanced conversation. And so now let's get into the positives of paid DLC, which yes, I do think there are quite a few positives with paid DLC. The first positive is that logically speaking, Activision and the COD studios do have a bigger incentive to make sure the maps that are paid are higher quality and have as much depth as possible to convince more people to buy them. Now, don't get me wrong, there still is an incentive even today to make the maps good because of course they want that player retention to be higher and higher, and people are only going to want to return to the maps and play them bunch if they're actually decent. But I do feel like it's a lot less than it was for paid DLC maps, and in general, nowadays, they kind of do rely on bringing people back with that new content and then showing off a bunch of different events and different grindable things that they can do in order to increase FOMO in fans, which of course is the fear of missing out. So people feel like they have to stick around, they have to grind out these events, they have to go for the schematics in Modern Warfare Zombies, for example. Every time they added a new set of schematics, it was always, oh, you have to go grind for the schematics. That was always the thing that was keeping people invested. Of course, it was free content that they can grind for, which I don't think there's anything wrong with having free content to grind for, but a lot of times it did feel like that's what they were relying on. And the more people play the game, the more likely they are to buy items in the shop. And I do think this is possible why maps nowadays don't feel nearly as unique anymore, because they have less of a reason to make each map feel so distinct from one another. If all the maps are free anyways, people are probably going to try them out regardless. They're not going to just be like, oh, I'm not going to try out this map because I heard it's not unique enough compared to the other maps or whatever it may be. They're probably going to try it out anyways, and they might have some fun on it, who knows. Whereas in the older games, if those maps are said to be very similar to other maps that already exist in the game, why are they going to buy it? If they hear everyone complaining that it feels just like the previous map, why is somebody going to buy it? Now, something that's really fair to mention here is that ever since Black Ops Cold War, when they started this whole free DLC thing, the games have also had significant issues with being rushed and having a lack of resources put towards them. I mean, just for example, after Call of Duty 2025 releases this year, Treyarch will have made 5 Zombies modes in the span of 6 years. That's way more than they've ever done before. Just for reference, from Call of Duty Ghosts to Black Ops 4, that 6-year period, Treyarch only made 2 Zombies modes within that period. So now they're doing 5 in that same amount of time. Of course, that's going to result in the maps not feeling nearly as in-depth as they maybe once did, or maybe not having nearly as much quality with all of the maps. Now, I'm not saying all the maps are bad, but there definitely has been significant issues with some of the maps, like for example in Vanguard, some of the DLC maps in Black Ops Cold War. I know people complain about the Tomb a lot, and we'll get more into that in a bit later, but I do think there has been a lot of reasonable arguments brought up against a lot of DLC maps in the past few Call of Duty Zombies titles. And I do think the issue there goes far beyond whether it's free DLC or paid DLC. They probably shouldn't be making that many Zombies modes back to back like that. I definitely think we need to see the other studios make their own Zombies modes so Treyarch can focus on their own for a longer period of time, and hopefully that would fix the problem itself. Regardless, I do think it is at least fair to mention that paid DLC could result in these studios being able to put more resources towards the maps and making sure they are as good as they possibly can be and as unique as they possibly can be. Now, a very common counter-argument to this claim is that you are not guaranteed a great map just because it's paid, and that is obviously the case. This is obvious for literally anything in the entire world. You are never guaranteed a good product just because you paid for it. But of course, what's a good or bad map does come down to opinions. There are probably many people out there who do think that every single paid DLC map has been amazing, and then they probably think that a lot of the free DLC maps haven't been amazing. That's just, of course, down to opinion. And to be fair, most people who are defending paid DLC maps are likely not saying that they think every single map that was paid is guaranteed to be good. I don't think anyone's really making that argument. It's more about the chances of it being better when it's paid is more likely. I know something a lot of people have been doing is cherry picking different paid DLC or free DLC maps and kind of talking about like, oh, well, we got these bad maps when they were paid, and then, oh, well, we got these bad maps when they were free. But overall, those are just cherry picked arguments and don't really mean much in the overall grand scheme of things. But I thought it might be worth it to go through literally every single DLC map from World at War to Black Ops 6 and go over how many of the paid DLC maps were mostly loved by the community versus how many of the free DLC maps were mostly loved by the community. I decided I would go off of that rather than my own personal opinion because, of course, my opinion is going to be very different than everyone else. To be honest, I think a majority of the paid DLC maps were pretty solid. There's not many that I strongly dislike. So I tried my absolute best to go over which DLC maps I think were mostly liked by the community as a whole. Of course, some of these maps you might hate yourself, but I do feel like these maps just had more of a positive reception than a negative one. So let's start off with the paid DLC maps that I felt like had a mostly positive reception to them. Verrucht, Shinonuma, Der Riese, Ascension, Call of the Dead, Moon, Mob of the Dead, Buried, Origins, Der Eisendrache, Zetsubo no Shima, Garad Krovi, Revelations, Raven the Redwoods, The Shadowed Throne, Dead of the Night, Ancient Evil, and Tag der Toten. Now, there's definitely some there you can argue against whether or not you think they had a positive reception. I didn't include Shangri-La. I felt like a lot of people hated that when it first came out. Obviously, I didn't include Die Rise. I think that definitely got a lot of hate. I didn't include most of the Infinite Warfare and World War II DLC. I think they should have gotten more love, but unfortunately they just didn't by the community. Most people did not like those maps. And then for Black Ops 4, I did include Dead of the Night and Tag der Toten. Dead of the Night didn't get a lot of love when it first released, but I do think nowadays it gets way more love than most maps, so I do think it deserves to be included. And Tag der Toten is another one that I think got enough love to the point where it deserves to be included. But again, this is not my own personal opinion. If it was my list, like I said, majority of maps would probably be on there because I do think majority of the paid DLC maps were pretty solid. So this would mean 17 of the 31 paid DLC maps were mostly positively received by the community. This is 55% of the paid DLC maps. But to be fair, this is heavily weighed down by the non-Treyarch games. Like I said before, a lot of people just didn't like those games. I didn't even include a single Exo Zombies map because I felt like most of them were mostly hated by the community, so it didn't really make sense to include any of it. And Infinite Warfare and World War II got a lot of hate. I do think it's unfortunate that people just didn't really give those games a chance, but of course, they just didn't get a lot of love by the community. But if we were to only include Treyarch with this, then it would be 16 out of 19 paid DLC maps were mostly positively received. That is 84%. And this was not even including any remasters or remakes. I would say for the most part, those got a positive reception. So if I did include Zombies Chronicles, then this list would definitely be even more increased in the positive direction. I just didn't think it'd be fair to include remasters. Now, when it comes to free DLC, let's go through the maps/experiences that I would consider to be mostly positively received by the community. So first of all, I said Outbreak's first Easter egg. I decided to count each Outbreak Easter egg as a separate experience, and I do think that experience got enough love from the community just because of the Legion boss fight. Then you have Mauer Toten, of course, got a lot of love by the community. Shinonuma Reborn, not the most amount of love ever, but in comparison to the other Vanguard maps, it got enough love that I do think most people like that map to this day. Modern Warfare Zombies Season 1 got a lot of love for the Dark Ether update, and then Modern Warfare Zombies Season 5 got a decent amount of love for the Entity boss fight. And then for Black Ops 6, just Citadel More and Shattered Veil were mostly positively received. Now, of course, like I said, this is just my own observation and estimates. I'm not making some gigantic objective claim here because, of course, this is not an objective measure, but I thought it would be fun just for the sake of argument. I'm sure some people would argue that Firebase Z, Forsaken, and the Tomb got more love than not, but personally, from what I saw, I don't think that was the case. I actually like Forsaken more than the average person. If I was to do this list myself, I would include Forsaken as a map that I like more than I don't, but I just did not see that from the community. A lot of people did not like Forsaken. So this would mean 7 of the 16 maps/experiences were mostly positively received in the free DLC era of Zombies. And the reason why it's 16, like I said before, I'm including all the different experiences, so that includes each Modern Warfare Zombies season from Season 1 to Season 5. I didn't include Season 6 there because obviously there was nothing there. I only included the main updates for that game. And then for Outbreak, I just counted each Easter egg as 2 separate experiences, and then everything else was just a bunch of maps. Turning this 7 out of 16 into a percentage gives us 44% compared to the 55% from the paid DLC era. And if we only include Treyarch's main games like their Black Ops games here, because like I said before, a lot of the times the non-Black Ops games do weigh down the rating quite a bit because a lot of people just don't like the non-Black Ops Zombies experiences nearly as much, that would still only be 4 out of 8, which is 50% compared to the 84% with the paid DLC. overall, like I said before, correlation does not equal causation. Just because I threw a bunch of numbers out here does not necessarily mean this guarantees the fact that you're going to get better quality with paid DLC maps. No, of course not. I just wanted to throw out some numbers here because I feel like a lot of people kept cherry picking specific maps to talk about, and I thought it'd be better to talk about all of the maps that we've seen throughout the years that of course were DLC. I think it just puts things into perspective that when we had paid DLC, people were usually happier with the content we were getting. And I do think it is fair if we give it a few more years to make a full judgment here, because of course, like I said before, there's been a lot of development issues with the past couple Call of Duty Zombies experiences to the point where it really is hard to properly judge this. But overall, even though it sounds like I am heavily defending paid DLC maps, I do actually think we should never return to doing paid DLC maps. I think the positives for free DLC maps is a really good thing, and it really is healthy for the mode as a whole. But I really do want zombies to return to having the level of quality, detail, uniqueness, and depth that a lot of the maps from Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, World War II, and Black Ops 4 did. And I do think it is possible for them to return to that again with the maps still being free. But to be completely honest, if I come back to this topic in 5 years and I still feel like Zombies is struggling to really have complete in-depth experiences that feel very unique from one another, then maybe I'll be changing my mind on this by then. But regardless, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Which do you prefer, free DLC or paid DLC? Or do you have more of a nuanced take on it like I feel like I do? I'll see you on my next one. Peace out.